Welcome in, everybody. Ready to dive into some Nietzsche. You sent us some really interesting excerpts from a Spanish language book about him. And honestly, I think it's about time we tackle this guy head on. Why is he still such a big deal over a century later?
Yeah, he's kind of a legend, isn't he? There's this saying that Nietzsche is a philosopher for everyone and no one, and I think that's pretty spot on.
What do you mean by that?
Well, his ideas, they're super powerful, really get you thinking, but they've been used in so many different ways. Some people, they see Nietzsche as this, champion for individual freedom, while others, well, they think he's dangerous, too radical.
So, not exactly an easy read then.
No, not always. Think of it like this, his writing, it's not just a book.
Yeah.
It's more like a carefully crafted artifact almost, something that's meant to shake up your whole worldview.
I like that. An artifact. So how do we even approach this artifact then? Where do we start?
Well, Nietzsche himself once said that knowledge is a dangerous operation from which one does not emerge unscathed.
Okay, sounds a bit intense.
Yeah, it can be. But it's also incredibly rewarding, because engaging with Nietzsche's ideas, it's not just an intellectual exercise. It's like a transformative experience.
All right, I'm intrigued. But before we get too deep into the philosophy, maybe we should take a step back and talk about the man himself. What was Nietzsche's life like? What kind of experiences shaped his thinking?
Well, Nietzsche's life, it was definitely marked by tragedy. He lost his father when he was really young, and then his younger brother died a few years later.
Wow, I can't imagine losing both your father and brother so young.
Yeah, it definitely had a profound impact on him. It really shaped his views on life and death and suffering.
That makes sense. And didn't he also struggle with illness throughout his life?
He did. He suffered from a lot of health problems, migraines, problems with his vision. Eventually, it kind of led to a mental breakdown.
Wow, so his own personal experiences with suffering really fed into his philosophical work.
Absolutely. It's kind of a recurring theme, this idea that life is full of suffering and how we deal with that suffering. That's what really matters.
And amidst all that suffering, there's this one figure who keeps popping up in his writing that, I've got to admit, kind of fascinates me. Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and ecstasy. What's the deal with that? What does Dionysus represent for Nietzsche?
Ah, Dionysus, yeah. He's a key figure for Nietzsche. He saw him as a symbol of the primal, instinctual side of life. Like the force that disrupts order and kind of unleashes this creative energy.
So it's not just about partying then?
No, it's much deeper than that. Think of it like this. Dionysus represents a kind of knowledge, a kind of truth that shakes you to your core. It's like a wild, intoxicating experience, It can be both liberating and terrifying at the same time.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see that. But I also read about this myth connected to Dionysus. Something about a companion named Silenus and a dark secret about existence. The wisdom of nausea, I think they called it.
Ah, yes, right. The myth of Silenus and King Midas. Yeah, it's a pretty bleak story, actually. Silenus, he's this companion of Dionysus, and he gets captured by King Midas. And when Midas asks him, what's the best thing for a human being, Silenus basically says, the best thing is to never have been born, and the second best is to die quickly.
Whoa, hold on. Is Nietzsche saying that life is pointless? Like we should all just give up?
No, not at all. He's not promoting despair. It's more about confronting this absurdity, acknowledging that there's no inherent meaning in life so that we can then create our own values.
Okay, so it's like staring into the void so that you can then fill it with something meaningful.
Exactly. It's through that confrontation with the void, this wisdom of nausea, that we can start to understand one of Nietzsche's most important ideas, the interplay between Dionysus, the god of chaos, and Apollo, the god of order.
Okay, so there's a balance there. It's not just about embracing the wild side.
Exactly, yeah. Nietzsche saw Apollo as this god of reason, the structure form, the force that brings order to chaos. And he believed that both Apollo and Dionysus are essential for a balanced life.
This reminds me of something else I read about, this idea of the birth of tragedy. Does that tie into these two gods?
Absolutely, yeah. Nietzsche saw Greek tragedy as this perfect fusion of Dionysian passion and Apollonian structure. You have this raw emotion that's channeled and given form by reason and order.
But there's a twist, right? Didn't Nietzsche blame someone for the death of tragedy?
He did. And it might surprise you, but he actually blames Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, the champion of reason. Nietzsche argued that by emphasizing rationality, Socrates actually suppressed the vital Dionysian element, which basically killed tragedy.
Wow, okay, that's a pretty bold claim. But I'm starting to see how all of this connects, the interplay of these forces, the confrontation with meaninglessness. It's all building towards something bigger, isn't it?
It is. And that something bigger is perhaps Nietzsche's most famous and most misunderstood idea, the death of God.
All right, here we go, the big one. God is dead. What did Nietzsche actually mean by that?
Well, first of all, it's not about a literal death, but a metaphorical one. Nietzsche was basically pointing to the decline of religious belief in 19th century Europe.
Right, the whole God is dead thing. It was more of a cultural observation than a theological statement.
Yeah, exactly. But more importantly, he was highlighting this collapse of any absolute foundation for meaning and morality.
I remember that story he tells about the madman searching for God with a lantern in broad daylight. It's a pretty powerful image of disorientation and loss.
Absolutely. For Nietzsche, the death of God, it's not a cause for celebration, but profound challenge. It throws us into this state of nihilism where, all values seem meaningless.
Okay, so if God is dead and traditional morality is out the window, what are we left with? Is there any hope for finding meaning in this, nihilistic wasteland?
There is, but it requires a radical shift in perspective, a willingness to embrace what Nietzsche calls the eternal return and the challenge of becoming the overman.
Okay, now those are two concepts I definitely need some help unpacking. Starting with eternal return. That's like cosmic Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah.
Except for other.
Yeah, you could say that. It's this idea that we live our lives over and over again for eternity, with every detail repeating exactly as before.
Whoa. Just thinking about that makes my head spin. But I'm guessing this isn't a scientific theory.
No, you're right. It's more of a thought experiment. The challenge of the eternal return is this. Can you embrace every aspect of your existence, knowing it will recur endlessly? Could you? Or would you need to change something?
That's a powerful question to ask yourself.
Yeah.
It really makes you examine your choices and priorities.
It does. And for Nietzsche, the ability to embrace the eternal return, that's the mark of the overman. This individual who overcomes nihilism and creates new values based on a passionate affirmation of life.
So, the overman isn't afraid of this eternal recurrence. They've embraced it somehow. But what exactly does that mean? What does the overman actually look like?
That's a question we'll explore in more depth as we go along. But just think of the overman as an ideal, a direction for human evolution. They embody strength, creativity, self-affirmation, and this relentless pursuit of excellence.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. The death of God leads to nihilism, but the eternal return and the overman offer a way out. It's like a philosophical escape hatch.
Mm-hmm.
But how exactly do we get through that hatch? What does Nietzsche propose?
Well, to get through that hatch, Nietzsche offers this pretty radical idea, the transvaluation of values. Basically, he's asking us to question, those fundamental ideas about good and evil that we just, take for granted.
Hold on. So is he saying right and wrong are just made up?
Yeah.
That there's no such thing as real morality?
Not exactly. It's more about looking deeper, understanding how our ideas of good and evil, how they developed over time, and what kind of, hidden power dynamics they might be concealing.
Okay, so how do we even start to, untangle all of that? Where does he see this transvaluation happening?
Well, he identifies two main types of morality, master morality and slave morality.
Okay, I'm already a little wary of these labels, to be honest.
Yeah, I get it. But don't get too hung up on the names themselves, They're just analytical tools to help us understand different perspectives on values.
Okay, so less judgment, more analysis. Got it. So what's the difference between these two types of morality?
So master morality, it basically originates from those who naturally affirm life and their own power. They create values based on their own strengths, courage, excellence, pride, creativity.
So it's about celebrating individual achievement, striving for greatness.
Exactly. It's about setting your own standards, living according to your own values. Now, slave morality, on the other hand, that emerges from a place of resentment, It's a reaction against those who embody master morality.
So it's born out of a sense of weakness, feeling overshadowed.
Yes, and it's characterized by values like humility, self-denial, pity, those kinds of things. And Nietzsche argues that these values, while they're often seen as, virtuous, they can actually be used to undermine the strong and kind of level the playing field.
It's like saying that sometimes compassion can be a way of masking resentment, or even pulling others down.
That's a great point. Nietzsche was definitely wary of what he saw as this kind of hidden resentment that drives some forms of compassion. He wasn't saying compassion is always bad, but he wanted us to be aware of the motivations behind our actions, even the ones that seem virtuous.
Okay, I see that. It's about, questioning those knee-jerk reactions we have to certain values, looking beyond the surface. But this brings up a big question for me. If these are two different perspectives on morality, does Nietzsche favor one over the other?
That's a good question. He doesn't present it as a simple choice between good and bad. It's more about pointing out that these are two different approaches to life, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. He's more interested in helping us understand them, not necessarily choosing a side.
So how do these two types of morality actually play out in the real world? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about how we view success in our society. Someone who embodies master morality, they might define success by their own internal standards, like their creativity, their impact, their self-mastery. They're not driven by external validation.
And someone with slave morality might define success by comparing themselves to others, feeling resentful of those who achieve more or have more.
Precisely. They might even try to downplay others' achievements to make themselves feel better. Nietzsche sees that kind of resentment as this poison that weakens the individual and stifles creativity.
This is really making me rethink some of my own assumptions about success, how I measure it. But if Nietzsche is critiquing traditional morality, what does he propose as an alternative? What does a Nietzschean morality look like?
Well, he's not advocating for any rigid set of rules, It's more about a fundamental shift in perspective, a move away from resentment and toward this life-affirming embrace of power, creativity, self-overcoming.
So it's about taking ownership of your own life, creating your own values based on what truly resonates with you.
Exactly. It's a process that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront those uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world.
I'm starting to see how this connects back to the Overman we talked about earlier. This transvaluation of values, it seems like a pretty crucial step in that journey.
Absolutely. The Overmen, they embody this new life-affirming morality. They've moved beyond the limitations of both master and slave morality and created this new set of values based on a deep understanding of life's fundamental nature.
Okay, so the Overman is like a master chef of morality, taking all the best ingredients and creating something totally new. But let's go back to the eternal return for a minute. It's a really powerful concept, but I'm still wrestling with how to apply it to my everyday life.
Yeah, it's definitely a mind bender, but remember, it's a thought experiment, a tool for self-evaluation. It forces you to ask, if I had to live my life over and over again exactly as it has been, would I embrace it? What do you think? Could you say yes to every moment, every joy, every sorrow, knowing it would recur endlessly?
Honestly, I don't know. It's a terrifying thought. But I guess the point is that if there are parts of my life I wouldn't want to repeat, maybe those are the parts I need to change.
That's a really powerful insight. The eternal return, it's not about seeking a life free from suffering. It's about finding meaning and purpose within the suffering. It's about saying yes to life, even with all its imperfections and challenges.
So it's not about avoiding the tough stuff, but learning from it and growing through it.
Precisely. And it's also about, finding joy in the simple things, knowing that each moment, even the mundane ones, is both unique and eternal.
This is starting to resonate with me, but there's still a part of me that struggles with, everything repeating exactly as it has been. Doesn't that kind of contradict the idea of growth and evolution? If everything recurs exactly as before, how can we truly change and become, better versions of ourselves?
But that's a great question. Remember, the eternal return isn't about a literal repetition of events, It's more about a recurrence of the underlying forces and patterns that shape our lives.
So it's more like recurring themes and patterns rather than a precise replay of every detail?
Exactly. The eternal return, it challenges us to see the interconnectedness of all things, the ways in which our choices and actions ripple through time, creating these patterns that repeat themselves in different forms. It's like a cosmic dance where the same steps are repeated, but with these subtle variations each time.
That's a beautiful way to put it. But even with that understanding, I'm still kind of stuck on the practical implications. How does this concept actually inform our choices and actions in the real world?
Well, the eternal return, it's not like a set of rules or a moral code, It's more of a perspective that can inform our decisions. Imagine, you're standing at a crossroads, faced with a choice. Ask yourself, would I want to repeat this action, this experience for all eternity? If the answer is yes, then you're acting in alignment with the eternal return. If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to reconsider.
It's like holding each decision up to a cosmic mirror and seeing it reflects the kind of life we truly want to live over and over again.
Exactly. It encourages us to be more mindful, more intentional in our choices, knowing that they have these ripple effects that extend beyond like our immediate experience.
This is so thought-provoking. But I have to admit, there's still a part of me that resists the idea of the eternal return. It feels, I don't know, kind of deterministic, like we're trapped in a loop with no real freedom of choice. If everything is just going to repeat anyway, does it really matter what we do?
I get that. The idea can feel a bit stifling if we interpret it too literally. But I think Nietzsche would argue that it's actually the opposite of deterministic. It's a call to embrace our freedom, to take responsibility for our choices, and to create our own destiny within this grand cycle of existence.
So it's not about being a passive participant in a predetermined play, but about actively shaping the narrative with each choice we make, knowing that those choices are going to reverberate through time.
Exactly. And it's through that active participation that we can find meaning, purpose, and even joy, within this eternal dance of life.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening conversation. We've explored some of Nietzsche's most challenging and profound ideas, and I'm starting to see how they can be both illuminating and empowering.
Yeah, they really are. Nietzsche was a true original, a thinker who dared to question everything and offer a new vision for humanity in this world without, easy answers. But his philosophy, it's not just about ideas, it's about transformation, about pushing ourselves to become, better, more conscious, more alive.
And that transformation, it often starts with a critical look at our own beliefs, our own values, the things we often take for granted.
Exactly. And that's where Nietzsche's critique of traditional morality comes in. He wants us to see that what we call good and evil might not be as clear-cut as we think. He urges us to look deeper, to understand the origins of our moral beliefs, and to question whether they're truly serving us.
Okay, so let's dive into that critique then. Where does Nietzsche see the biggest problems with traditional moral systems? What's got him all fired up? All right, so let's get into it. Where does Nietzsche see the biggest problems with traditional moral systems?
Well, one of his main points is that traditional morality, especially the Judeo-Christian tradition, it sets up this really strict division between good and evil. And Nietzsche argues that this division, it's based on a flawed understanding of human nature.
So he's saying our ideas of right and wrong, they aren't as black and white as we might think.
Exactly. He uses this term, genealogy, to describe his method of tracing the origins of moral concepts. He's a historical detective digging into how these ideas develop over time.
So instead of just accepting good and evil at face value, he's looking at how those concepts came to be, where they came from and why people started using them.
You got it. He argues that moral concepts, they evolved, shaped by power dynamics, social customs, even the psychological needs of the people who created them.
So morality isn't some fixed universal truth. It's more like a product of history and culture. That's a pretty radical idea.
It is, and Nietzsche sees this questioning of traditional morality as a necessary step towards creating new values that are more life-affirming.
Okay, so how does this genealogical approach actually work? Can you give me an example of how Nietzsche traces the origin of, a specific moral concept?
Sure. Now, one of his most famous examples is his analysis of guilt. He argues that guilt, it didn't originally come from a sense of wrongdoing, but from this ancient relationship between creditors and debtors.
Wait, so he's saying that guilt is rooted in economics?
In a way, yeah. Think about it. In ancient societies, if you couldn't repay a debt, you were often subjected to physical punishment as a form of payment, through suffering.
Ouch, I'd rather just pay my bills on time.
Right. Well, Nietzsche argues that this connection between debt and suffering, it eventually evolved into the psychological concept of guilt, that feeling of being indebted to a higher power even when there's no actual debt to be paid.
So guilt is a kind of internalized punishment. We make ourselves suffer for things we think we've done wrong, even if no one else is demanding it.
Exactly. And Nietzsche argues that religions and moral systems, they've kind of used this concept of guilt to control and manipulate people.
It's like a psychological tool to keep people in line,
Yeah.
Make them conform to certain rules out of fear and self-recrimination.
You're getting it. And Nietzsche, he wants us to see through this manipulation, to understand where these feelings of guilt come from and free ourselves from their grip.
This is all really insightful, but it's also raising some big questions for me. Like, if guilt is a social construct, does that mean there's no such thing as right and wrong? Are we just making it all up as we go along?
That's a question Nietzsche leaves open for us to consider. He's not saying that there are no objective moral truths, but he's challenging us to question the foundations of our beliefs,
Right.
to create our own values based on a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
So it's about taking responsibility for our own moral compass, rather than blindly following what we've been told, making like conscious choices about what we believe in.
Exactly. It's a journey that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to face, the complexities of human nature, which brings us back to that idea we touched on earlier, master morality.
Right. The alternative to that slave morality we were talking about, this is where Nietzsche gets really interesting, right? It's his vision for a new kind of ethical framework.
Exactly. Master morality, it's about creating your own values, not inheriting them from, tradition or authority. It's about becoming the author of your own life.
So it's about self-discovery and self-creation, not obedience or conformity. That sounds pretty empowering. But I'm still a bit fuzzy on what master morality actually looks like in practice. What are some of its key principles and values?
Well, one of the core values is strength, but it's not about brute force or dominating others. It's a more holistic strength, physical, intellectual, and spiritual. It's about cultivating your talents, overcoming challenges, pushing yourself to be the best version of yourself.
So not a gym rat, but a well-rounded individual who strives for excellence in all areas of life.
Exactly. It's about realizing your full potential, not for, power over others, but for the joy of creation and self-expression. Think of like an artist who pours their heart and soul into their work, striving to create something beautiful and meaningful. That's an expression of master morality.
That makes sense. But what about values like, compassion, kindness, empathy? Are those absent from master morality?
Not necessarily. Nietzsche doesn't reject compassion outright, but he believes it should flow from a place of strength and self-assurance, not pity or obligation. It's about giving freely because you want to, not because you feel you have to.
So it's more about like genuine generosity of spirit,
Yeah.
helping others because it brings you joy and fulfillment, not because you feel guilty or pressured.
You got it. Master morality is about acting from a place of abundance, not scarcity. It's about sharing your gifts with the world because you recognize their value and you want to contribute to something larger than yourself.
This all sounds very appealing, but isn't there a danger that this focus on like strength and self-affirmation could lead to, arrogance, a lack of concern for others? Could it become a kind of me first mentality?
That's a valid concern. Taken to extremes, yeah, master morality could definitely lead to those negative outcomes. But Nietzsche would argue that true strength, it isn't about, egotism or putting yourself above others. It's about understanding your own limitations, being willing to learn and grow, and recognizing your place within, the grand scheme of things.
So it's about finding a balance between self-affirmation and humility, recognizing your own worth while also acknowledging the worth of others.
Exactly. Master morality isn't about becoming like this superhuman who's immune to weakness or vulnerability. It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, our strengths and our limitations, our joys and our sorrows. It's about becoming more fully human, not less.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation. We've explored some of Nietzsche's most challenging and profound ideas, and I'm starting to see how they can be incredibly relevant to the challenges we face today. His call for self-reliance, for critical thinking, for embracing the fullness of life. It's a message that speaks to me on a deep level.
Yeah, me too. In a world that often feels, chaotic and uncertain, Nietzsche offers us a path toward creating meaning, purpose, and even joy in the midst of it all.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Nietzsche's world, what's one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
I think it's this. Nietzsche's philosophy, it's not about, finding easy answers or following a set of rules. It's about questioning, exploring, and ultimately creating your own path. It's about embracing the challenge of becoming who you truly are. And that's a journey worth taking, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's about embracing life in all its complexity and finding the courage to create something meaningful, even in a world without guarantees.
Well said. And who knows, maybe along the way we'll even catch a glimpse of that elusive overman striving for excellence and illuminating the path for others.
To everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep becoming.
Until next time, farewell.